call the meeting to order. If I could have the attention of all the commissioners.
You've got it.
Roll call's been taken.
Yes.
Okay. Approval of the minutes of the August 6th, 2015 regular meetings. Motion to approve?
I'll move.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any corrections or changes to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Next item on our agenda is the administration of the oath of office to firefighter paramedic Anthony Lucchini.
I'd like to introduce to you Anthony Lucchini. He's got an associate degree in fire protection from Fox Valley Technical College. He's also got his paramedic diploma from Mid-State Technical College. He's a certified firefighter 1 and 2. And he comes to us from Door County,
Oh,
working as a paramedic over there.
good for you. Anthony, what I'd like you to do is raise your right hand and then repeat after me. I, Anthony Lucchini,
I, Anthony Lucchini,
having been hired as a firefighter paramedic,
having been hired as a firefighter paramedic,
swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States
swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of said position to the best of my ability.
and faithfully discharge the duties
Of said position to the best of my ability. So help me God. Congratulations. This is his wife Sarah, and she's going to pin his badge on. This is an opportunity, Sarah.
Not today.
Congratulations. And here are the other symbols of your position.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Congratulations. Now, is it Anthony or is it Tony? Anthony. I'm glad we've got that straight. That's good.
Fettuccine to some.
Oh, we have introduction of a new police officer. Chief?
Alex, if you want to stand up. This is Alex Mitchell. Alex started with us on last Monday with the police department. Alex is originally from Marshfield. Went to school at UW Eau Claire. Received his certification through Chippewa Valley Technical College. And we're happy to have him here. He's starting his training process, and so far all's going very well.
That's right.
Well, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
I met his mother and dad last Monday, and talk about proud. Anyway, okay, thank you. And guys, if you need to go and fight a fire, you're welcome to do that.
They don't need to be told twice.
Next on our item on our agenda is approval of the police department bills. Chief?
So you have two sets of bills in front of you, both signed by Commissioner Keel, one on the 4th of August, one on the 18th of August. Just one thing I want to bring to your attention would be on 6J, there was a $1,700 unexpected bill that we ended up receiving with some damage that needed to be repaired in our elevator shaft. There had been some backup water that had sat in there for quite some time. We finally noticed it, I want to say, in the winter or early spring. It was removed. There was a clog or some piping issues, but as a result of that backup water sitting where a lot of the springs and components of the elevator are, we needed to replace some of those to bring it back up to code. So that's where that $1,700 bill came in. Otherwise, I would ask for your approval for these two sets of bills.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the chief about the bills that he's presented? Hearing none, I'll call a question. All in favor of the motion to approve the police department bills signify by saying aye.
Can I have roll call?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Roll call.
You were doing so well.
CRC.
All right. Mr. Franklin?
Yes.
Mr. Gershman?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Keo, yes. This roll call stuff is silly. Approval of the fire department bills.
Just as the police department, we have two sets of bills sitting in front of you. Just two things to bring to your attention. On page 7M, there's a bill from Protect Security Sales, and that's actually for the purchase of 4 bulletproof vests that we got as a result of a grant from Enbridge. And on page 7N is our final payment to Zoll for our new patient EPCR software. I'll entertain any questions and ask that you approve the bill as presented.
Well, motion to approve.
Second.
Any comments or questions? Chief, how will you determine who wears those vests?
The vest, there's 2 vests on each one of the ambulances, and who's ever on that ambulance at that time, if we have like an active shooter situation, they'll go in with the second or third police car that comes there. And so if there's anybody that's injured when they're doing the sweep for the active shooter, then they'll don the vests and the helmets and take the specific med packs that we have for that.
Okay.
Have we done some simulations in the past working with PD on this?
Yes.
Yes, just,
Okay.
we actually had last, I think June or July, we had a 3-day training session.
Okay.
Yeah.
All 3 shifts here. And
So here's a question for the chief. Can you imagine any scenario where we'd ever arm a firefighter paramedic?
I can't, just because, I mean, it's not what they're trained to do. That cross-training.
Exists, I think, in some municipalities, but not many. I like them being experts in their field and us being experts in ours. And there's a little bit of overlap, maybe with some minor first aid on our part and with some minor, whether, traffic direction or needs for crowd control on their part. But aside from that, I think we do best maintaining the expertise in our own fields.
I think you're right, and I think probably the firefighters appreciate that position too.
Also, if you arm them, then their mindset becomes different than that of a caregiver, and so it's not the best thing in the world across the board. I do foresee a time when they're taught how to use an officer's gun, so if the officer is damaged, they can use the gun as self-protection, but I don't see that being anything more than that, and I don't really see that coming down the pike for quite a while.
Very good. Thanks.
Well, I don't like the idea of firefighters having to wear bulletproof vests, but it's the world we live in, so. All right, I'll call a question with a roll call this time. Mr. Franklin?
Yes.
Mr. Gershman?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Keo, yes. Motion carries. Police Department activities, training reports, and correspondence. Sir?
Yes, not a real busy month for the month of August, but nonetheless still had many events that we took part in. A couple things I want to bring to your attention. On the 11th of August, our drug officers presented a drug trends presentation to social workers from Wood County Human Services, as well as probation and parole, and some Department of Corrections workers from Clark County. We pride ourselves in having an educational component, not only to the community, but to other departments and organizations that we work closely with. We've come over on a handful of times and trained or taught paramedics and firefighters on certain aspects of our job, and this is just another outreach to those other organizations that we work closely with, just to keep them up to speed on the different drug trends that we're seeing in central Wisconsin. And it was very well received. That presentation took place at the police department. As stated earlier, on the 24th of August, Alex Mitchell began employment with us, and on the 25th of August, I just wanted to bring this to your attention, a drug task force meeting that we had at the police department this is just organizing, further organizing our, what we're having is we're having a booth, a heroin education booth at the Central Wisconsin State Fair. And it's going to be manned by individuals from the Drug Task Force, as well as law enforcement and other community members, just to educate the community of the dangers and of heroin, what we're seeing in the community, what we're seeing in the surrounding areas, and how the community and law enforcement can partner to combat it. So I would ask and encourage all community members to visit that heroin booth at the fair. It's in the main expo building, and that's all I have for the activities report, unless you have any questions.
Any comments or questions from the commission?
I have a question, Chief. And you've probably done this, and I apologize if I didn't realize you did. Do you have anything on public television about this heroin and how dangerous it is? Have you done anything yet?
A couple of months ago, that was, I do the cable access, or the Marshfield community television, and we have talked about the heroin problems in the community on Insight with Jeff Cannon. I've been on the radio a couple of times, and we've touched on the heroin problems. It's one of those topics you can never get out too much. But it's going to be a continuation with the partnership between the city and the monies that they put towards the heroin initiative, both last year and what's in the budget for this year. It's going to be probably for the next few years, you're going to hear this on a regular basis, just those community partnerships and how we can, the next steps, I guess, into trying to control what's being reported nationwide as an epidemic. A couple of things that I didn't bring to your attention, just with through other correspondence. We continue receiving restitution checks from defendants who have been arrested for drug offenses. Usually if there's buy money that's used to buy drugs from them, or if there's cleanup costs, as we did with one individual who had a meth lab in their residence, they owe the city or the department back restitution for the costs of those cleanup costs, or for the costs of the buy money that was extended to them to purchase drugs in an undercover capacity. So often when you see checks coming in from Wood County courts, that's what those are for. It's restitution money that then goes into our 206 seizure fund, which then can be used towards purchase of equipment and items that the department needs for investigative purposes. And that's all I have for.
Thank you.
Did I answer that question?
No, you did. Thank you.
Other questions for the chief? So we accept and place on file. Do we need a vote? No, we don't. No need. No vote. No. Okay. Continuation of the 1033 program discussion. Chief.
I think this was put on the agenda just so that we had a bigger group to discuss this on and answer any questions there might be. The 1033 program is a national program for military surplus equipment, or to be disseminated amongst law enforcement agencies throughout the nation. We've historically taken part in this program, and to the community's benefit, in the last probably year and a half, we've obtained probably $40,000 worth of military equipment, such as backpacks, duffel bags, scopes for the sniper rifles, other types of miscellaneous investigative equipment, and we've paid a mere fraction of what the value is. I believe we've invested $800 to $1,000 in $40,000 worth of equipment. And all we have to pay is for shipping and handling of those items to the department. We are still on the list, and I had brought this up at the last meeting, we're still on the list for a personnel carrier or a rescue vehicle that would be an armored vehicle that would go into a situation and rescue people or keep people safe. in the past, I know that there's been discussions on both sides as to the necessity of a vehicle in a community this size, the accessibility to a vehicle from surrounding jurisdictions or surrounding departments, and how quickly we could get that vehicle here in an emergency. In my opinion, it would be wise to stay on that list of departments requesting a vehicle of such, and then we make that decision, I guess, at that time if one would become available to us. A MRAP is what they're called, a rescue vehicle, armored rescue vehicle, carries a price tag anywhere from $400,000 to $800,000. It's a vehicle that we would be given by the military for transportation costs just to get it to our department, which would probably run $5,000 to $7,000 to have that vehicle delivered. So we're receiving a potentially $600,000 vehicle for $7,000. Vehicles like that, you can customize them, paint them in a community-friendly mode so it doesn't have to look like a militaristic vehicle. It's to save lives. It's to rescue individuals, rescue officers, rescue citizens who are injured or who are trapped in danger. And I think the time it would take to bring a vehicle from a neighboring county to Marshfield is time lost when it comes to potentially saving lives or protecting lives. So I guess it would be my recommendation that we stay on that request list for such vehicle, and if the time would ever come in the future that that one be made available to us, that we hold a separate meeting for that and make a decision as to whether or not that's a donation or purchase that you feel is important for the community before it's made. That makes sense.
Questions, comments?
I'm not convinced that we would need one, and I can understand the logic of staying on the list, and even though it's a very expensive thing, I'm just worried about what the legacy cost would be for things like maintenance and storage, and you know, I can't imagine the hydraulics and the engine system on something that expensive. So I think it's worthwhile, my personal opinion, to stay on the list. I'm not sold on the idea that we need one in the community, and I'm not so sure the community would embrace the idea of having it. And I understand there's going to be a situation at some point that we could use it, but I'd really want to do some deep exploration on whether we need this or not, and also neighboring communities as far as what they have the ability to be able to use theirs. So I can absolutely support the idea of staying on the list. I'm just not, at this point, I'm not convinced that it's the best idea.
Additional comment?
I go along with what Commissioner Gershman says. I'm concerned about the maintenance costs of it. And when this was brought up the last few meetings, I questioned, do we truly need something in Marshall, Wisconsin like this? But kind of going along with what's happening in the drug world today and what's happening in our country today, I would support getting one, because I wouldn't want to be on this board to say we didn't have it and then we did need it. And when it's coming at a pretty fractional cost, I would hate not to support it. But I would, as it gets closer and you do find something cheap, I would research what where to get something like this maintained. And I don't know a thing about them other than seeing them on television. I wouldn't know a thing about them. So
yeah, I know in the last meeting there was a descriptive paragraph or two about the vehicles, about the engine, the transmission, and it's all things that we could have serviced locally. Many maybe high-end components that may be costly, we can always reach out to the military to see if they have surplus repair items and get those obviously for shipping and handling charges. So I mean, there are options such as that could bring those costs down. Obviously, you still have the labor costs of maintenance on that. We've worked with City Garage as far as a place to store something like that should we need space, because we don't have space obviously at the police department for such a vehicle. But I guess what I was just looking for is just for your blessings to stay on that list for.
Yeah, I would stay on the list.
Okay.
And I know there's various itinerations of the MRAP, certain sizes and such, and they're gonna be demilitarized to a certain degree, but I would really like to know a lot more about it.
Just a kind of question for you, Rick. They are demilitarized. There are no offensive weapons on that other than what the officers bring with them, correct?
Correct. It's pretty much a armored shell of a vehicle. There's no turret on there. There's no guns, no missiles of any kind. It's just a vehicle that's that's armored. No different. I mean, law enforcement in general has had armored vehicles in its fleet for quite some time. There's been what was called Bearcats, which were armored vehicles that I know many departments had 20 years ago, and used them for SWAT operations to safely deliver SWAT teams into a hostile environment, or to be able to go in and rescue personnel or civilians when they're taking on live fire. So it's one of those vehicles that if we ever did take on, that I hope we do never have to use. I really do, because when we're bringing that out to use, it's a very bad situation, and there's a high probability of loss of life with or without it. It's not a guarantee that it's going to save lives, but there's obviously the better odds of saving lives when we're using a vehicle such as that.
I'm not completely aware of which neighboring counties have them, but obviously I know Marathon County does. Does Portage, Clark?
Portage has one. I believe Wood County Sheriff's Department might have been allocated one. I'm not sure if they took possession of it. So we're talking, some of these, we're only talking maybe a 30-minute to 40-minute drive time, but top speeds on some of these vehicles are only 50 to 55 miles an hour, and that's a matter of getting somebody who's trained to drive that vehicle to your location and getting the proper permissions from administration from that department to allow that individual to then drive that vehicle out of jurisdiction to your location. So I mean, you could be talking an hour to an hour and a half before a vehicle such as that gets here, where if we had a vehicle in town like that, you could be talking 10 to 15 minutes. So I mean, that is significant, even if we're just talking in Wisconsin Rapids or Stevens Point or Wausau, starting point.
Mike, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'm in agreement that we should stay on the list. I have some questions that maybe you can check into in the meantime, and I'll continue to talk to people that I see and bring the subject up just to get a feel for what that public reaction might be at the time.
Sure.
But I'm curious into what type of agreements we could work out as far as communities around us. I mean, not saying everything happens in the city, but if the townships would buy into it, we'd be a lot closer than Wausau for the town of McMillan and the town of Spencer and all that kind of stuff. And same with all the townships that we serve with medical services. It could be very well that they could all share in the use of this, and time would make a big difference in cases like that. And I guess if you just started some discussions with them to see if they'd be receptive to the idea, or what liability we'd have and all this kind of stuff that enters into it. But I think we should stay on the list. I'm convinced that at the time we need it, it sure would be nice to have it. And I'd hate to be the one sitting there wishing if they'd have some way to get me out of a situation. So looking at it that way, the public, there's probably a good part of the public that supports that idea as well. So I think we should continue to explore that possibility, so.
Yeah, I think definitely we'd have to reach out to the Common Council. I know
Right.
several people, my impression is, would not be too excited about seeing a militarized vehicle in this community, so I'm sure there'll be more discussion. Thank you.
Just a response to that comment, while I understand we have to pay attention to that, our obligation is Police and Fire Commission to the best interest of the police and fire departments. We don't have anything here to vote on this issue, but I think there's a clear consensus that we stay on the list and that the chief bring us together if the opportunity arises. In the interval, I think we do need to do some discussion with others in the community to find out. And I'm not so sure it's a matter of, it may be more a matter of having the community understand why we might favor getting such a vehicle. All right, are you all okay with that, Chief?
Yes.
All right. Crime reports are next. Is there anything in the crime reports that you presented that you think we should pay particular attention to, or that would be informative in some way, special way?
No, not really. Some of the numbers are down compared to last year, and which is a good thing. Some of the disturbances and family offenses that we've responded to, and even some of the drug numbers are down slightly from where we were last year. Timing-wise, it's good because we had somewhat of a rough summer with individuals out on FMLA and some injuries, workman's comp injuries. So it was a busy summer because we didn't have significant staffing to respond to the calls for service that we did have. But the numbers are presented in front of you, and there's nothing within them that is of concern to me.
Okay.
But I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the commission? No, it doesn't seem like it, so thank you. Policy review and approval. So, Chief, you're still on.
There's a couple of policies that I have in front of you. Use of public property policy that I would ask for approval on, off-duty conduct policy, and lastly, a law enforcement Bill of Rights policy that I would just ask for your approval so we could add those to our policy manual.
This Bill of Rights, Chief, where did it come from?
Again, it's something that many agencies that are going for accreditation have in their policy manual. It's not something that our department has ever had previously. It more or less just defines what a law enforcement officer is according to statute and what their responsibilities really are as an officer. And yeah, it's pretty, we've always gone off of state statute for defining what a patrol officer, a police officer, peace officer is. This is just putting it into policy.
We need a motion to approve all three policies.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions about the policies for the chief? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Oh, wait a minute, we got to do roll call. Mr. Franklin?
Yes.
Mr. Gershman?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. Keo, yes. Motion carries. Review and approve installation of GPS system by Merkel.
Yes,
We have, I wrote out a budget resolution last year to take monies that we had in our budget and purchase the remainder of the intersections necessary for the preemptive lighting. We received all of that equipment. Now there's a matter of installing it, and there's a fee that comes with the installation, which was not necessarily budgeted for or written into that budget resolution. there's a couple of options we have. We could either pay for it out of the police department's budget, which an estimated cost of $6,800 to install this equipment into the remaining 9 intersections within the city. Or, and I haven't talked to Chief Haight about this at all, but there is monies in the emergency management budget that could potentially absorb this as well, which would then fall on the city council to make that, I guess, approval to, or I don't even know if they would have to approve it, if we would need to do a budget resolution for that, because I mean, each intersection is in and of itself, but I guess I would just look for some direction if we should just absorb that in our budget, or if you would recommend seeking out maybe a balance between ours and emergency management.
Yeah, I think it's really a shared responsibility between the two departments, because you both use it to have the police department pay the full cost.
But I guess for that, the fire department did cover the first 18 intersections
Okay.
that were installed, and whether it was through a budget resolution or through CIP, I can't remember.
CIP.
Okay, but that did eventually come out of their budget, the first 18 intersections. Now the remaining 9 intersections, we had said we would take on.
Okay.
So now it's just a matter of paying to have them installed. And I don't know if Chief Haight has any thoughts on using emergency management money
Yeah,
for
I
some
think
of
that's a
that.
good idea, and it probably would require a budget resolution, but I think that's an appropriate use for that, because it would not just be our agencies, other agencies that have this system would also be able to utilize it as well, and so it's proved its worth so far, and any reservations I had about the system are gone. I mean, so I think it's definitely worth having all of them. Right now, I think the lack of them with the system being in place is hindering certain applications and that, so I think finalizing this is really important. So I think the emergency management budget would probably be a real good place for that, but we'd have to work that out with Finance Director Stry.
That'd be my preference, just as an opinion.
Terry, you were gonna say something, I'm sorry.
No.
Excuse me. So what I'm hearing is that we would approve going forward with this, seeking emergency management funding to support it. If that does not work, is the motion going to include then moving forward with funds out of the police department budget?
I would make that motion. I'm fine with
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I think you understand the, okay. And this too then would require a roll call. Mr. Franklin?
Yes.
Mr. Gershman?
that. Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Keel, yes. Motion carries. Approval of budget resolution for investigative purchases. That's 13A, right? Yes.
What you have in front of you is a budget resolution for a couple of purchases that are necessary. This budget resolution is tapping into monies from that that 206 fund, that investigative fund that we either holds seizure money from drug transactions or restitution money that we've collected over time. The purchases listed in here, some of them are equipping that 4th detective position that we're hoping to fill by the end of the year. And then a couple of the other purchases are just, again, investigative tools, camera lenses, some cameras for some of our alarm systems that we feel are necessary for to continue the proficiency that our detective bureau has been experiencing. Some of these items will be used for drug investigations, for surveillance and such. So I guess I would look for your approval of this budget resolution. And then I wanted to bring one thing to your attention after that's approved.
Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion, we have a second. Any questions or comments for the chief? All in favor of the motion signify, oh God, we gotta do roll call again. Mr. Franklin?
Yes.
Mr. Gershman?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Keel, yes.
And lastly, with the budget resolution, just to give, I guess, everyone a heads up, I've received some interest from a couple of leaders in the community that have said that they are willing to donate money to the police department to be used for investigative purposes, namely potentially purchasing a unmanned aircraft vehicle, a drone, is what they're often referred to as. This is not a purchase that, this is a purchase we've been looking at some time. Some neighboring agencies have similar items. What a UAV would be used for, specifically in a community such as Marshfield, would be potentially to take aerial photographs of traffic crashes, to be able to use in conjunction with fighting fires and be able to get a good overview of maybe where the fire needs to be attacked from a good height to where they could actually see a live feed of how the fire is potentially progressing. Something like this could be used for surveillance purposes prior to a SWAT team making entry into a potentially hostile area. One of the biggest areas I believe one of these UAVs could be used for is for finding lost children, elderly individuals who often walk away from nursing homes or CBRFs, and we're potentially left wondering, okay, where do we start our grid search or our ground search when potentially we could have a unmanned vehicle up in the air doing a search for us. Again, there's been, like I said, some interest from the community as far as donating monies. If there was additional monies that were needed, we do have money in that 206 seizure fund to finalize a purchase like this. I'm not asking for, I guess, permission at this time to go ahead with a purchase. I guess just wanted to give you a heads up that there's some interest from the community in equipping police and fire with such a vehicle to where it could be used to further assist the community. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on that.
It is getting fairly common. A lot of departments, sheriff's departments and others are using UAVs. Again, you know, you're gonna have, my chagrin is you're gonna have to have a policy in place when it's used and how it's used.
Agencies that have policies in place, Plover PD has had one of these, their new chief had brought one in. He's kind of a hobbyist when it comes to that. They've actually had a couple of manhunts that they've assisted Portage County with and have used that vehicle successfully in apprehension of the individuals. It's definitely something that would need policy in place, and when to use it, who uses it, how to be trained in it. And those policies obviously have to coincide with FAA regulations and such. And we've also received model policies, because Marathon County Sheriff's Department has 2 or 3 of these. Wood County Sheriff's Department has one, although they don't have a policy yet for use, so they're not really actively using it until that policy's in place. But it would be a simultaneous thing from our stance that the policy would be in place at the time of taking on something like this.
Yeah, and I think there's some licensing also required by the FAA too for certain uses, so.
There's some paperwork that has to be filled out through them. There's more exemptions for protective services than there would be for the average hobbyist. But with that, yeah, there's still notifications that have to be made with them, and that would all be taken care of at that time.
How much money are we talking about to get a device that does what you would want it to do?
To get a basic one would probably cost $1,500. To get one that is a little more advanced and that would have a night vision capacity of it, infrared capacity, so you could actually potentially see you know, body heat or just an individual walking at night. That something like that would probably run closer to between $4,000 and $6,000. So it's kind of right around, I guess to say $5,000 would probably be a
That's fine.
safe number.
Just curious.
And the numbers I've heard from these donations locally, as of this time, would probably cover half of that.
I'm not so sure you could raise any more money, but I think once you put together kind of what the mission of it's going to be.
Sure.
And the scope of it, I think a lot of people would embrace that. It can be used a lot. Again, there's privacy issues with that also. So you need to be sensitive to that.
And knowing that, and only using it when needed, when necessary.
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, no.
I was fortunate to get a basic demonstration of one of these, and obviously they come in different sizes, and had the demonstration on a smaller one, a middle-sized one, and a larger one, and I can see a lot of benefit at some point in time for both departments to utilize something like this. Right now, there are in place federal regulations for the use of them. I mean, you can't just drop one in somebody's front yard. In fact, it can't touch the ground in somebody's front yard. But there are guidelines that law enforcement would be granted beyond what a private user would be able to do. So it's kind of an exciting new innovation that I think we could find useful. And I'm not getting excited about it for the novelty of it, it's just that it's a very useful tool. At some point in time, if it came down to it, I could see where it could be put to good use.
Chief, I think the consensus is it's move forward, make sure that policy is in place, begin working on that piece of it, but keep us up to date on what's going on and how you're moving forward. Okay. Thank you, Chief. You had a lot to bring to us today. Fire Department activities, training reports, and correspondence. Chief Haight.
Yeah, I just have a few things to bring to your attention. Page 14A, the Sports Medicine Department at the clinic came in and did a presentation to us on interfacing with them at football games and that on equipment removal and everything else, which has changed considerably since the last time we had that presentation, so that was very nicely received. 14B, the green shift did work on our landscaping, which was kind of interesting. We were able to utilize firefighters' second careers to this department's advantage, and so that was greatly appreciated. They did a great job. 14O shows you that Enbridge donation that we discussed earlier. 14R, we had a couple stopped in on their way home from the hospital. We had picked up the gentleman, and they were very, very appreciative of the help that they received from the ambulance and the care that they received. And it was really interesting when they were surprised at how helpful they were at that early time of the morning. So it's these emergencies come any time of the day or night. Then let's see, there was page 14U. We had a very nice email in exchange. We hosted a Eau Claire Fire Explorer post, which consists mainly of females, but they came in for the day as part of that, and the Red Shift worked very, very well with them, and it was a very nice letter of thank you between the two. It was kind of a mutual respect type of thing, and the young ladies and the young gentlemen that were there really had a great time, so it was a great way to promote the fire service itself. And then 14V, if you look in both sets of packets between the police department and the fire department, these two young ladies, opened up a little lemonade stand, and both departments ended up visiting that same. So they brought in information, pictures and that, and a thank you for that. So, but it's just a nice way when they occasionally, both departments on a regular basis will stop at these little things and interface with these young people. They're all future firefighters or policemen. That's all I have.
I haven't thought of it that way, but you're right.
Yes.
Thank you, Chief. Any comments or questions from the commission? No. Approval of solicitation of businesses for Fire Prevention Week. Right.
We skipped one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Strategic planning.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I just want to update you on the plans. Through the accreditation, we're also going to be developing our strategic plan. And one of the things that we have to do is get community input. And so you're going to hear that I'm going to be sending out questionnaires and then ultimately bringing in private groups, you know, from the community, to business community, private citizens, city department heads, you know, common council members, just to kind of get their feedback from that. And that's also going to include you gentlemen. I guess my question to you would be, is this something you would like to schedule a meeting for, or just do it through the questionnaire basis, or a combination thereof? I'm open to whatever, you know, we can work out. So I'm just looking for your input as to how you'd like to handle it on that part.
Any comments?
I think we need to schedule a meeting, do we? Questionnaire would be fine,
Questionnaire would be fine?
in my opinion.
Yeah, mine
Very
too.
good. Yeah, and then if anybody goes through the questionnaire and wants to come to me and, you know, flesh it out even more, that would be fantastic. I'll make sure that that's listed there. So this is just an informational thing for you.
Yeah. No, I think a questionnaire is fine. It may be that some of the commissioners would like to have a little more nuanced input, and we'll do that with you individually then.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, approval for solicitation of businesses for Fire Prevention Week prizes.
Yes, this is something we do every year. Basically, during Fire Prevention Week, we solicit businesses for small little door prizes and things like that. And so I'm just looking for, notify you and asking your approval to be, again, participate in that this year.
Do we need to vote on that?
Um,
I didn't mean to wake
yeah, you did.
you. We do, okay. We need a motion to approve? Second. Any comments or questions? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign, motion carried. Is there any, we have a guest that we haven't introduced, sitting over here. Why don't you introduce yourself so we know who you are?
I'm Jonathan Ennis from the Porter.
Well,
Okay.
thank you for coming, Jonathan. It's nice to know that we deserve, or that we warrant attention. Any additional further business for the assembly? Hearing none, thank you for being here this morning, and I'll say we're adjourned. No. And thank you for the photographs.